Who's the most surprising athlete behind the scenes? You're like, wow, this guy is not who I thought he was, or this girl is not who I thought she was.
Yep. Probably like Calvin Cater. Like, he's behind the scenes. He is just like super, actually also Justin Gaethje, man, both those guys like smart as whips. Like, when you start talking about things like science wise, they are the most intelligent human beings, right? And like, both of them are brawlers. Both of them go in there and brawl it out, both Calvin and both Justin. Yet you take them out of there and they're the most intelligent people you've ever spoken to.
Who's the biggest nerd on the UFC roster?
Oh, the biggest nerd. Oh, God. Oh, I got to go with Cory Sandhagen.
Cory Sandhagen. Wow. That's incredible.
He's he's like he's the quietest, like, just like nicest human being. And oh my God, he's another killer, right? Like, these guys are so funny. I mean, all of them are amazing. I have to say that.
I'd like to take a second to thank our sponsor, Ving Vodka. Ving Vodka is the world's cleanest vodka, made with organic non-GMO corn, and it's gluten, additive, carb, and sugar-free. This is the purest, most refreshing vodka you will ever experience. And the topper, it tastes pretty damn good.
Woman-owned and woman-run, Ving Vodka is the world's cleanest vodka for the adventure, the artist, and our favorite, the athlete. Cheers. And it tastes absolutely delicious. Ving.
Give them a follow at Ving Vodka on Instagram. And if you're in New York or California, check out vingvodka.com to find the liquor store that carries it. Not any of those lame-ass liquor stores carrying Tito. Absolute. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Outside the Stadium. We are here today with the Director of Physical Therapy from the UFC Performance Institute and the unsung hero of the UFC Embeddeds, Heather Linden. Heather, how's it going today?
It's going great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you chatting with me. And yeah, I'm excited to have some talks.
Awesome. Awesome. And thank you for taking the time. For those who don't know, for those who maybe don't watch the Embeddeds, can you just explain, first of all, what you do at the UFC Performance Institute, and then what the UFC Performance Institute is there in general for?
Yeah. So the UFC Performance Institute was built about 4.5 years ago. So it was to give the rostered athletes access to a multidisciplinary approach on everything from sports medicine to nutrition to strength and conditioning to sports psych to sports science. So we were brought in 4.5 years ago to really help out the athletes and start to kind of mold the sport of MMA into kind of that science professional sports organization where athletes, have access to all of this. My role at the UFC Performance Institute is to be the director of physical therapy. So I run our sports medicine clinic out of Las Vegas, as well as our Shanghai facility. So I manage the team of various clinicians. So we have sports chiros, we have physical therapists, we have athletic trainers, and I manage the medicals, overseeing all of the rostered athletes. So making sure their rehabs are going as planned, any injuries, help them manage through them, kind of guide them on what they should be doing to get, return to sport, to improve that injury, and then also help them day in and day out when it comes to fight week. So the week of the fight, we travel with the athletes. They have full access to us. We set up a little sports medicine clinic in the hotel, or if the fight is in Vegas, we have access to the whole Performance Institute. And what we do is we'll manage any injuries coming in. Sometimes injuries happen during the week of, like we had a world champ once twist his ankle on the mat training, and we had to, make sure that fight happened. So we're kind of on call 24/7. We're kind of physician extenders, liaisons, making sure that all the injuries are managed correctly and the athletes get to the right sources in order to return to sport.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know that, like you said, it's mostly fight week time, but the Institute itself is an absolutely gorgeous facility. And, a lot of fighters, maybe if they're just starting out and they're just signed to the UFC, they don't have access to maybe some of the big gyms that everybody else has. Is there an option to maybe train there, not just on fight week, and just show up in Vegas and say, hey, can I use this facility?
Yep. So any rostered athlete can show up to Vegas anytime, can show up to Shanghai anytime, and have free access to everything. So meals are included. The nutritionists work with them and they get free meals. They have sports medicine access. So they can book appointments. They can walk in for appointments if a new injury happens. They have access to our S&C. so they can get a full programming, fight week programming, non-fight week, we can do remote programming and everything for them. They have sports science. So we look at sleep recovery, our sponsorship, like partnerships with like Aura rings and stuff. So we can manage their sleep recovery, track all their information that they need in order to make sure their schedule is appropriate. They have access to our sports psychologist. So it's, a full guru of all performance, based providers, and they have access to us 24/7. So they can just show up and say, hey, I want to use medicine, or I want to use nutrition, or I want to use all of it. We also do like baseline diagnostics for them. So what we do is each department has their list of baseline diagnostics, and we can compare them to that weight class to see if they're in the appropriate weight class. How is their power and strength compared to that? Should they go up a weight class? Should they go down a weight class? Can they make that weight class? So our nutrition teams does full analytics of, what is their bones weigh versus what their muscle weighs, what their fat weighs, what kind of substrates are they utilizing when they're walking, running, jogging, so we can like help get their weight descent to be a lot more healthy and science-based, not just these drastic weight cuts. So we look at all aspects, and we can really give all their information to them. That's the coolest thing, is we share all the information that athlete wants to whomever they want. So if it's their S&C guy, back home, we'll share all the information. If it's their coaches, anything that athlete wants that can help improve them as an athlete, we're there to help out and share and just be, voices of giving them information and some science background.
No, that's incredible. And that just comes to mind. Do you have any success stories like that? I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking Charles Oliveira, Gilbert Burns both moved weight divisions and had an extreme amount of success. Can you tell me like a success story about somebody who you were like, hey, you're competing in the wrong division, you should change?
Yeah. So actually, a really cool one that I think our first one that we ever did was Anthony Smith, and also like Thiago Santos, like they both went up to 205, right? So
yeah,
when we came in, everyone's always worried about being smaller, right? But when you come in and we look at exactly where your strength is, we could literally talk to Anthony Smith and be like, holy crap, you're as strong as any of the 205ers. Like, why are you doing these huge weight cuts and then feeling like horrible and not being able to perform? A lot of times if they are drastically cutting weight, their entire fight camp becomes more of a weight cut camp rather than learning skills, how you're going to take on your opponent and things like that. You have to focus on your weight cut so much. So being able to partner that and look at, hey, in the data, you're right here in your strength, you're right here in your power, your VO2 max is this, these injuries are occurring because you're cutting everything out and depleting your body, and then you're training so hard. So like, it's pretty cool when you start to pull the science out of MMA, which has never been done before. So that's kind of why we were brought into the system. Why we were brought is to help athletes, learn to be better athletes.
Yeah. And I want to give credit to you guys, because if you look at the timeline, you said about 4 or 5 years ago that you guys were getting started. That's pretty much when the UFC and mixed martial arts in general went from a pretty niche sport to maybe even like top of the world right now. Like, everybody, even if you're not following UFC, okay, once a month, don't ask me to do anything on Saturday nights, because everybody's tuning in.
It is. I mean, I definitely contribute, a lot of things happen with COVID and stuff, but we definitely put our stamp out there, and, we're able to continue to perform, have all the precautions that we needed to take, have a great team of staff that, we're able to mold and take on different roles to keep our athletes' safety and health, a priority, but then continue the show, right? And you're seeing now all of our top athletes are really good athletes, right? It used to be a little bit more, I don't want to say wild, wild west, but, like, there wasn't the science base that goes through when it comes to athletes. You look at like NFL, they grow up high school football, college football, they have teams around them. So they're really used to having all of that as they move forward in their career, where our athletes really never had that. So it's fairly new. What we've done in the past 2 years, we've published 2 journals of all the information. Like, one thing we love to do is we share information. If we're not out there sharing it and learning, we're not doing our jobs. So we, put that out there free on the web so that all athletes, coaches, other sporting organizations can look at what we're doing and how we're constantly testing ourselves upon every day. So.
Yeah, I love that you're looking at big picture, because, you're probably helping a lot of the maybe young mixed martial artists who maybe aren't in the UFC yet, but could be one day a UFC champion. And you're saying, hey, this is not just us. This is the sport as a whole.
This is sports. I mean, one thing you can see, there's so many sporting organizations that, don't always put the athlete first, right? It's always the sporting organization that's a priority and stuff like that. And one thing that we've been really lucky to do is be completely athlete centered, which is really hard when it comes to professional sports. You know, every athlete is treated differently on the roster. Every athlete has a unique program. It's individualized and catered exactly to that athlete. So we might have a bunch of, you know, 205ers, light heavyweights that are coming in, but each one of them is treated completely different, which you don't see that. You know, normally on a professional sporting organization, you know, your quarterbacks are all grouped into this and doing the same stuff. And everybody's body is different. Every athlete's a little bit different. They've had previous injuries, they've had things. So it really does need to be catered to that individual and be really athlete centered, which is something we've been able to be true to.
That's awesome. And I've really been dying to ask you this question because I'm a law student. So the first thing I was looking for in like a potential firm is like, I'm like, who has the UFC as a client? How did you get involved in this? Were you a UFC fan before you took this job, or did it kind of just fall into your lap like that?
Fell into my lap, honestly. So I worked with the Olympic team for 6.5 years. And fortunately for me, I was out of Colorado Springs, and that was where most of our combat sports were. And a lot of our combat sports camps came through. So constantly working with all 3 disciplines of wrestling, boxing, judo, taekwondo, you know, men's gymnastics. And that's kind of the sports that filter into MMA. So, you know, my first day when I got a call from a recruiter saying, we'd like to talk to you about UFC, I was like, I don't know anything about your sport. And they're like, actually, you know a lot more than you think. And when we started talking, and I was like, oh, well, if they're grapplers, they're going to have these injuries. And if they're boxers or strikers, this is, and, you know, I was talking to Forrest Griffin because he was interviewing me, and I was like, well, I would do this. And he was like, oh my gosh, you know so much when it comes to combat, which is a really small niche, right? Because most PTs that they had interviewed were like from the NFL, were from NBA, and they were like, they just didn't really understand the combat world. So I think I was really fortunate to fall into that because I had so much combat sport experience from the Olympics.
Yeah, it's almost like, okay, you don't know the UFC, but you know the U, you know the F, and you know the C. So
right,
that's together.
And it's funny because I remember the first few days. I mean, I didn't know most of the athletes, like, right? So I'd be like, this guy came in, is he a UFC? You know, I had a NFL player that Dana had said that could use the facility. So I was like, oh, when's your next fight? And he's like, no, I'm an NFL player. I'm like, I don't know. Ew, like, give me a body. Let me treat it. Let me get you back to whatever injury you have. And that's all that matters.
For sure. So, I mean, it sounds like you guys are doing so much. And this may be a little bit of a tough question to ask, but, or even answer, but what is next for the UFC Performance Institute? Because the UFC as an organization is never stagnant. You guys are always evolving. So I want to know what's on deck.
Yeah. So what's on deck is, you know, we're doing such cool things. It's time to get it out there, educate people, right? So the newest thing we're doing is starting to do some online platform stuff. So whether it's a accreditation where, you know, we work together to get certified as a clinician that's, you know, kind of working with us simultaneously, doing the research, improving. So we're going to do a lot of like teaching, online teaching. We're going to host courses. I'm going to be speaking at like ringside positions with a bunch of neurologists and do a lot of new concussion stuff that's out there for our athletes. So we're constantly evolving. We're looking at even, you know, microdosing, things like that for brain health. And there's so much going on out, you know, behind the scenes that we're doing. But the most exciting thing is going to be the platform that we're going to start to educate, I think, just even the general population, right? So a lot of people, you know, recently I've been fortunate to get some referrals from docs to do rehab on outside clients as well. And when they just come through, they're like, why doesn't normal physical therapy places do this, this, and this, and this, right? So it's time to really educate everybody out there and realize, you know, you're not just going into a physical therapy clinic and getting a hot pack and getting 3 exercises and going on your way. Like, we're doing disservice to our patients if we are doing that. So it's educating on this is actually what it looks like. You're going to, you know, get manual treatment done where there could be massage, joint mobilization, cupping, joint needling. We can use BFR, blood flow restriction, in order to improve the strength faster. We can cut, you know, rehabs down in half. And you know, being able to show that to the general population and other sporting organizations on how on top of things we are, I think it's pretty exciting.
That's so cool. You don't have to be a combat sports athlete to want to be in, you know, peak physical condition or
yep.
health. So I warned you about this, and I don't want to get you in trouble about like, you know, playing favorites or whatnot, but I want to ask you a couple of quick like speed questions.
Yep.
Okay. Because you see all these fighters, and a lot of what we do with this platform is we speak to them about, you know, what's going on in the fight game, but it's a lot of behind the scenes, like who are you outside of the octagon? So who is the funniest UFC athlete who's come across the Performance Institute?
Oh, the funniest. Gosh, this is going to be hard. I love, you know what? Santiago Ponzinibbio is hilarious.
No
Like
way,
that,
really?
he just like messages you and he's like, hi, Heather. I'm like, what do you want? And he's like, what do you mean? And then he just like always banters with my team, which is really funny. But he's just the sweetest man ever, right? He's a killer in the octagon. But then he's just bantering and always like, oh, he shows up like 15 minutes late to every appointment. He's like, oh, it's South American time. I'm like, no, you're missing 15 minutes. He's like, we'll go 15 minutes out. No, we won't. Keep like, it's just always really funny. We have Tatiana Suarez who's in town and she's hilarious too. Like I've known her from the Olympics and she's just a really good person to have around and she's been funny and she just drops things all the time. So there's so many funny athletes. Like, and this population is so, they're probably I'm going to like probably get in trouble for saying this, but they're probably my favorite athletes I've ever worked with. They're just so appreciative and they're so respectful and they're just so hardworking on everything they do. So it's hard to pick.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, I'm excited to hear the name Tatiana Suarez. It's been a while and I cannot wait to see her back in the octagon, but I have to echo what you're saying because I started this platform about a year ago. It was mostly like doing all kinds of, there's 3 of us and we were interviewing all kinds of athletes. At this point, yep. I am strictly doing UFC because the UFC fighters are so much more responsive and willing to talk than any other like athletes in any other sport. It's blown me away. Like everybody from when we had almost like only 1,000 followers, like Yuri Prohaska answered and said, hey, let's do it. I'm blown away.
Yeah, they really will take the time out. One thing I've realized, it's to be on a platform as a professional athlete, it's tough, right? You're always under the microscope. You're always, being judged on things. But these athletes go through a lot, right? Like they're putting it out there one-on-one. You don't have a team behind you. You're going in the middle of an octagon, trying to, I once asked one of my athletes, like, why do you do this, right? One of my world champs. And he said to me, it's like a human chess match. You have no one on your side. You have to outsmart. You have to outpower, outstrength, outlast, and figure out all the weapons that you have in your toolbox in order to, beat this person. And they're like, there's no sport like that, right? Like nothing like that. And I was like, when you put it that way, I get right. Like, people always get the brutality of it, because people do get injured or there's blood, because there's cuts and things. But really, when you take that out of it and look at the human brain and how you have to figure everything out and it's just you and your opponent, I can understand why they love it, right?
Yeah, for sure. I have to check you for a second. Do you watch the show Survivor?
I do.
Well, you kind of just dropped a Survivor ad. Outwit, outplay, outlast.
I actually almost was. I applied for that show and I got down to one of the almost people to be on it because I love that stuff. Yep.
You should apply again for sure. That would be they're back and
right.
Everybody would be eating whatever they see. You'd be monitoring exactly how much you got to eat per day. We have a nasty reward. Don't eat all those hamburgers. Not
right?
Not a good idea. Well, we got a little sidetracked. Back to this question. Okay, who is the most surprising athlete that maybe, because we see them on social media, and who's the most maybe behind the scenes, you're like, wow, this guy is not who I thought he was, or this girl is not who I thought she was?
Yep. Probably Calvin Cater. He's behind the scenes. He is just super, actually also Justin Gaethje, man, both those guys smart as whips. When you start talking about things science wise, they are the most intelligent human beings, right? And both of them are brawlers. Both of them go in there and brawl it out, both Calvin and both Justin. Yet you take them out of there and they're the most intelligent people you've ever spoken to. Even when I was doing baseline concussion screens with them, the way they remember stuff, it was so analytical. I'm like, okay, you have to remember these 10 words, recite them back to me. And they're like, da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did you just do that? I can't even do that, right? And so I think those two would probably stick out mostly in my head.
You kind of filtered into my last question. I don't even mean this in a bad way because I'm a bit of a nerd. And nerds are probably the antithesis of fighters. Who's the biggest nerd on the UFC roster?
Oh, the biggest nerd. Oh, God. Oh, I got to go with Cory Sandhagen.
Cory Sandhagen. Wow. That's incredible.
He's he's the quietest, nicest human being. And oh my God, he's another killer, right? Like these guys are so funny. I mean, all of them are amazing. I have to say that they're awesome.
This last question, I don't know if you can answer, but I have to ask you, is my favorite fighter, because you know behind the scenes now, is my favorite fighter Brian Ortega gonna win the UFC featherweight championship?
That's a tough one. I mean, Alex is tough. Alex is so tough. But I mean, Brian has the skill sets, but I don't know. I don't know on that one. That one's going to actually, I think, go the distance. And I think it's going to be a scrap and a half. And I don't know who's going to come out on top on that one. That one I'm going to say I'm neutral on.
I got you. So I asked this to all the fighters before we let them go. And I'm sorry I kept you so long, but this has been one of my favorite interviews by far. So enjoyable. But what is something that the UFC fans and the UFC population don't know about you outside of your job?
Outside of my job, I am probably the most busy human being ever. Like I never stop. So I'm the person that works all day at UFC, and then I see private clientele all night. So I probably work till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I'm up at 5 in the morning. I'm taking my dogs for a run. So people tend to think I'm absolutely nuts because I only need about 6 hours of sleep and I just keep going. I'm like that on button all the time. So that's probably something people don't know about me, is I'm equally as crazy when I'm not doing UFC stuff.
Wow, so busy and still taking time to come speak with me. That's a paradigm of UFC hospitality. Well, this has been Heather Linden, the director and pioneer of the UFC Performance Institute. Thank you so much for speaking with me, and I cannot wait to see what you guys do in the future.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.